This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering, of course, the Arizona Cardinals. And my co-host tonight, recording on a Tuesday night after a week off, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site for SB Nation's family of sites. And we're on episode 256. We had a week off. We now know who's in the Super Bowl. I actually didn't even plan to talk about much Super Bowl. We probably should lead a little bit with that. Seth, how you got the week off? We know who's in the Super Bowl. And we have the biggest news of all, of Larry Fitzgerald coming back. And that's what we're going to talk about kind of in this show. But Seth, Super Bowl time. Who do you like best? Do you want to see the 49ers or the Chiefs? Is it you going to go with the Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray comp? Or are you going to go with the NFC West, kind of the Kyle Shanahan? The Cardinals seemingly, after they looked like they were trying to model the Rams, kind of looked like they wanted to model the 49ers. Do you want to go with rooting for Tyrann Mathieu, or are you feeling bitter towards him? What's your take on the Super Bowl?
I'm all aboard the Chiefs train. Obviously, this podcast remembers this was where Mahomes bandwagon was. It always hurt, still hurts, but and then I've never really had a problem with Matthew. Like I said last year when this was all going down, he was betting on himself and he won. I mean, you can't fault a guy for wanting to bet on himself, especially, when the organization he's left has won 8 games the past 2 years, and both teams he's played on have been in the playoffs, and now one's in the Super Bowl. So, he made a business decision. The Cardinals made a business decision. I would guess that Matthew's correct in that business decision. The only bad part is Terrell Suggs got to loaf his way around here and then go to the Super Bowl.
Let's be honest, he's been kind of loafing his way around there. He's made a couple of
but and I never ever cheer for the 49ers or Seahawks or Rams to win. That's why last year sucked so bad, because I know you like to root for greatness in the Patriots, but I mean, it sucks to have to root for the Patriots because there's no way on earth you want the Rams to win.
Exactly.
So, it's all aboard the KC train, and like I've written about, I think KC's team building is the closest to what the Cardinals could possibly do in terms of mimicking. I mean, we could talk about building like the 49ers, but I don't know how many fans want to be bad until 2024. So, after
we've already been bad since 2016, sort of. So,
yeah, well, but you got to have 5 top 10 picks like the 49ers had to rebuild that roster, and then you have to fire your 2 coaches and 1 GM in that time span too. So, I guess they're down 1 coach, so Kingsbury and Keim, and then the next 2 will get it right after being bad for the first 2 years of their regime, right?
Yeah, that's one way to go. But yeah, Patrick Mahomes, if you like, so for me, like, I like the greatness. As I've gotten older, I appreciate dynasties and players going, like the fact that Tom Brady, I feel a little bad. I wish Tom Brady could have gone to a 10th Super Bowl, something unprecedented. It's crazy. But if I had to pick between who I want to see, do I want to see Jimmy Garoppolo win a title with a team that is built for him? Now, he's not bad. Again, Garoppolo in no way, like, he's played very well this year. But Patrick
especially
Mahomes
against
is
the Cardinals.
Star. Right, but Patrick Mahomes is a star. And kind of what Cardinals fans want to see is Kyler Murray to be like Patrick Mahomes. And if Patrick Mahomes can win a title in his second year of starting, his third year in the league, that's what you want to see. That you want to see that model work with that offense. And see that succeed, because that's what you want to see the Cardinals do in the next year or two, to take that, to see Kyler Murray have an otherworldly year like Mahomes did in 2018, and then to be still good but just very efficient, and then leading them to a title, getting hot at the end of the year. I mean, and that Chiefs team has 5 former Cardinals on there. Now, you count Terrell Suggs or not, but Tyrann Mathieu, I know there's a lot of fans who really have kind of forgotten about him because of what he said about the organization and how he's. But the fact is, there are some hard feelings there because the team did cut him. They did rip up the contract, though, so I get it. But he's a player that you should want to root for. But it's not just Ty. You've got Anthony Sherman there still, drafted by the Cardinals. Terrell Suggs. I mean, you might not love him as a Cardinal, but he still is quite admired here in Arizona for being the high school kid here, an ASU stud. You've got Xavier Williams, an undrafted kid that has made
a great
his way.
Story.
I mean, honestly, he's done quite well for himself in the league, and he could get himself another contract somewhere else. And Alex Okafor, who is stuck around, he's on injured reserve. He's stuck around in the league for a while. So they've got a number of players on that team that you have connection. And here's the thing. The 49ers have exactly 0 former Cardinals on their roster, which shocked me because of the number. You don't hardly see that, but there are no former Cardinals on the roster, so there's no one to root for. At least local, like with the local Cardinals ties, they're the division rival, and as Cardinals fans, we feel bitter because that's a team in the Super Bowl, and dadgummit, the Cardinals really should have beaten them once, probably twice.
Well, and the other thing is, you talked about greatness, and I think that's a good way to look at it. Is Patrick? I mean, you and I both believe strongly that not only is Kyler Murray going to be a very good NFL quarterback, but he could potentially be great over the next couple of seasons. That being said, Patrick Mahomes looks like he could be on the track to being the greatest quarterback that ever played football. So, like Jess said, that is something pretty unique and cool to be able to experience, like the entire. This isn't, and this is no shot, obviously, at the greatest Tom Brady, but this isn't Tom Brady where he's playing a role in his first 2 or 3 Super Bowl wins. This is a guy that has the team built for him, and that
with the Tom Brady success potentially,
right? And so that's a really interesting thing to see and to be able to experience.
Now, we'll be able to talk more about the Super Bowl, react to it, since that's coming next. But we'll go ahead and start on what we planned on doing. I didn't think about talking about the Super Bowl, and it made perfect sense to do it. But here's what's on tap for the show tonight, or episode 256. We're going to talk about Larry Fitzgerald's return. He has come back. He signed a new deal. He's going to play for the Cardinals in 2020. We're going to spend 2 segments on him. We're going to talk about some of the changes that have already happened on the coaching staff. They're not reported yet. I mean, they're not announced. They're not official. But apparently, of the 5 guys that are gone, we have 2 replacements. Then we're going to go through. This is kind of our off-season needs. We're not going to go into details, but we're going to go through position by position and talk more generally. What do the Cardinals need to do this off-season, at the different positions. So that's what's coming up next. That's what's coming up in this edition of the show. Let's start off talking about Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Fitzgerald, he signs a 1-year deal for the 2020 season. He returns after a 75-catch, 804-yard season in 2019, in which he moved into second place all-time in receptions. He had already moved into second place in receiving yards all-time. And so, first of all, your take on the timing of his decision and the reaction around for fans, the organization, and everything else. What was your take on all of that when the news hit last week?
I thought it was interesting that it was 1 week or 10 days sooner than last time. So clearly, he was being honest with us when he said things like, "This is the most fun I've had in a long time." I think we saw at the end of All or Nothing that kind of season really graded and took a toll, probably not just mentally but physically, on Fitz and all of the guys. And so to then go into last season and just the entire crap show that it was, and come out on the other side with what happened this season, I think it's kind of his way of saying, like, this was fun. This reminded me how football can be fun, that it's an enjoyable thing. And, I think that's a big thing for Fitz at this age, when he's a contributor. He is he's a guy that is important to the team, but he's not the game changer. He's not the, top 10 or 12 receiver in the NFL he once was, maybe even 2 years ago. So at this point, it's about, is he having fun, and is he, accomplishing things, personally and on the team that he wants to see. I think him coming back is a good sign for Cliff Kingsbury and kind of what he's doing as a coach here, and for Kyler Murray as a quarterback too.
What's really interesting for me is the fact that you referenced the 2015 year, and you watch an All or Nothing, just how just completely broken Larry Fitzgerald was after that loss to the Panthers in the playoffs. I'll reference 2016. I thought for sure that was his last year, because every game, the 2016, that was a year there was expectations, but he didn't look like he was having fun in 2016. He was hurt. He played every game, and he had over 100 catches, but you look at, like, he looked like it was where, like, the game was wearing on him. And maybe, here's the thing, maybe the pressure of getting the one thing he hadn't had, that title, weighed down on him, and he realized that maybe he had the realization, maybe it's not going to happen. I'm not going to get a championship. So I need to enjoy the time I have left. And so things happen differently. And so now he's playing, because each year it seems the decision is coming earlier. So even after, 2018, he still comes back because he's intrigued at what and he was so close to the second overall, the second all time. It only made sense for him to come back. But then after going through this having a young quarterback in Kyler Murray, who apparently really excites him, he's thrilled to be part of that process again, about building that team up, and not to be weighed down by expectations, but to be positive about it. And a group of guys in the locker room he likes, a coach he respects. It's all good. Now, how much longer do you think he plays? Do you think he comes back? I mean, as it is, he could, if he averages, so he needs basically 173, 172 catches, I think it is. He needs 172 catches to catch Jerry Rice for number 1 in receptions. He'll never catch him in yards or touchdowns, but that means 86 receptions per year, 87 receptions per year. Do you think if he has how many more years do you think he's got?
I think it's a year by year thing. I think if he's continuing to put up 60 plus catches and 700 plus yards, he's going to come back. If you see him get 150 catches the next 2 years, so say he has another 80 catch season, then he's down to 70 as a, what would he be, 38-year-old? Then like you said, he's 30 or some odd catches away. I think he'd come back. But if he comes back and he puts up 40 catches for 400 yards and he's, like you said, struggling with injuries and just looks like he's not having fun, I think that's how he'll go about it, more than anything else. I don't know. I wouldn't predict how long he'll play. I mean, if you ask Marcus Fitzgerald, he'll play as long as the Cardinals keep cutting him a check. So, but I think for Fitz, there is some pride involved, and he likes the fact that he's still kind of the top dog in the receiving core.
Well, that's something he said. He doesn't want to hang around too long. So he said as long as he feels he can play at a high level, he's going to do it, and his body's doing well. And so with that, it makes sense. Now the question is, at $11.75 million potentially, is the price too high?
Absolutely. And that's not a shot at Fitz. It's just reality. I mean, at this point, the team should be focusing their assets on different players. But at the same time, I understand. I mean, it is what it is. You can't do anything about it. That's the cost of doing business, whatever you want to say. So I think that, you're paying Fitz for the name and the number on the jersey, and whatever you get from that is, it's just kind of gravy on top.
For me, I'm okay with it. I don't, maybe it's too high, maybe not, but if you were to say, people, fans in particular, we see in our sites and our communities and social media, $8 million. Is it worth quibbling over $2 to $3 million? Really? Like, who are you going to, like, with that $2 to $3 million, what are you going to get instead? Like, are you gonna be able to significantly help somewhere else with that extra $3 million? Or, hey, he still puts panties in the seats. He's still the fan favorite. They still chant Larry, Larry, Larry every time he touches the ball. Kyler will get to the point where he gets more cheers than Larry. But, and here's the thing. You have to make it, if they want him back, and that's what they continue to want him back. The team wants him back. You have to pay him because, that's going to make it hard. He's going to have a certain price. He doesn't want to take a pay cut. No player wants to take a pay cut, especially stars in this league. So that's basically that. I don't care about the money. I think he's at $11 million the last several years. He made himself a big enough of a bargain for that 3-year run from 2015 to 2017 that, you can overpay him a little bit now because he was giving you top end receiver production, and he was not anywhere near the top of the wide receiver pay. And that's what I think about that. Now, coming next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, we'll talk a little bit more about Larry Fitzgerald specifically. When will it have been too long for the Cardinals to keep wanting him back? Talk a little bit about that. That's coming next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And here's the question. We've seen aging stars happen in Arizona, and it hasn't ended well pretty much yet. Charles Barkley managed to get himself traded. We saw there was hard feelings with Luis Gonzalez. He still wanted to play, and the team was ready to move on. Randy Johnson did go well. We saw it happen with Shane Doan. The Suns had to trade away Steve Nash. There were no hard feelings, but here we're at a place with Larry Fitzgerald. The team wants him back. He's costing a lot of money. When will it have been too long? Like, when will it be too long for the Cardinals? And do you think the Cardinals can avoid one of those awkward divorces that often has? We might see it with, like, here's the Chargers and Phillip Rivers. We saw it with the Colts and Peyton Manning. Tom Brady and the Patriots could be happening. Drew Brees and the Saints. It's really, really hard when we saw it with Brett Favre and the Packers. So when there's an aging player and you're ready to move on, but they're not, it's rough. Now, the Cardinals have made it very clear they're not ready to move on for Larry Fitzgerald. They want him to continue to play forever. Will the Cardinals, how long will it be too long before the Cardinals are foolish for doing this?
You know, to backtrack just a touch, you mentioned, you're okay paying Fitz. I always laugh at that comment simply because Larry Fitzgerald is literally the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history in terms of contract. So, I mean, he's been paid a ton. And after this season, I believe he'll move into the 9th all-time highest paid NFL player, and distance himself quite a bit from the next closest non-quarterback, which is Mario Williams. So Fitz has made a ton of money from the Cardinals. So I think as long as it's a mutually beneficial thing, the Cardinals should keep him around. That's why I'm okay if the Cardinals at some point don't want to pay him. It's harder to justify right now because they virtually have nobody to replace him in terms of talent or production. They had one of the worst receiving corps in the NFL with him on the roster. And so I think to move on from him would be foolhardy in the sense that it can only get worse without him until you have the right mix of guys in-house. That being said, if they draft a wide receiver this year early, they sign a guy, just throw a name out, like an Amari Cooper, who's going to be a huge salary type of guy, probably 19, 20 million. I think then you have to seriously think about where Fitz's future with the team fits. But he's a guy that means a ton to this franchise, and the franchise, while maybe not rewarding him in the sense of wins, he has been rewarded handsomely for his work as an NFL player.
And what I like is that the Cardinals have set it up to where it will end up being Larry's decision and not their decision. And maybe it'll come down to the point where they sit down and basically Fitz says, I'll play again, but this is my price. So he actually kind of joked about it. Like, there was a little ounce of truth to when there was one of his, I think it was his last media session of the year, and he made sure to point out Bruce Cooper, who's retiring from 12 Sports this year. And he said he already announced the retirement. He said, you did it wrong. You say you're considering going, but you leave the door open to say if they make an offer that you can't turn away from, that you go ahead and do it. Now, and I think in part one of the reasons why Larry has stuck around is, for the notoriety, for the records, but the fact that the Cardinals haven't tried to lowball him. And as such, as long as they continue to pay him that way, he'll continue. And I think what his brother said is completely true. There is a financial part to that. There's kind of a breaking point, and probably 10, 11 million is right around the breaking point. He has a lot of ventures that he's going to do after football. There aren't many things after the NFL that will pay you $11 million a year. So as long as he still can be a proud NFL player and perform and be proud of his performance and get paid well, he'll keep doing it. And I think the Cardinals have done a great job because they don't really have anything behind them. They don't have this. They've avoided that awkward divorce at the end of a career, which we've seen a lot of times. We saw it with Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers. You're seeing it now with Tom Brady potentially. We saw it here locally with Luis Gonzalez. He's now part of the team, but part of the organization. But there's hurt feelings, and he goes and plays elsewhere. And we know Larry's not going to play elsewhere, but you want, for his sake, for him to finish his career on his terms. That's been a big thing for him. So if it comes down to the point where the Cardinals don't want to pay the $11 million, that's what Larry will come sit down with Mr. Bidwill and will say, all right, do you want me back? Yeah. How much do you want to pay? Bidwill says, I think we can work in $8 million this year. And Larry says, nah, I'm good. I'll retire. I think that's what it'll be. And I'm hoping for, honestly, if he has a big year this year to where he's in reach for Jerry Rice, fantastic. But if he has another 75 catch year or just like a 70 catch year, 65 catch year, I don't want him hang around for the record. And I would love to see him just retire, say, I'm good now. It would also be great to see him go 2 more years, get the record, and see the Cardinals reach the pin. It would be fantastic. He goes out on top. But honestly, how often does that happen? You see it only in a couple of cases. Peyton Manning, as he is a shell of himself. John Elway, when he's a shell of himself. That's kind of that. But I don't think we'll get to that point. 1, maybe 2 years, I think, is all we can get out of Fitz before it gets awkward. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of things for Fitz, come into play in this, and if the Cardinals are not competitive, and then you, of course, and then you have the fact that maybe he's, like you said, isn't producing, then I think you'll see both of them assume it's time to move along. So that's where I think it'll be as you kind of get to the end for him.
Coming next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we're going to talk about the coaching changes. We know who's been let go or reportedly let go, or a contract's not been renewed. There's a couple of names that are coming back now. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now, we know we saw on the team page. I pointed it out. It was a little bit of reporting on my part. I looked on the coaching roster, and 5 guys were gone. So the 2 reported firings of Chris Acuff and Randall McRae, they're off the roster. Peter Bogdanovich, Badinovac, who was an assistant receivers coach, Vernon Stevens, and then there was another guy. But the 5 in all that were gone. Now, we know of 2 guys that are coming now, that are joining. One is Darius Swinton, assistant special teams coach. And then the new name that came out on Tuesday is Jim Dray. He was the offensive quality control coach for the Cleveland Browns in his first year of coaching in the NFL. He was a Cardinals draftee, drafted in 2010 in the 7th round, played 4 seasons for the Cardinals at tight end. Reliable, not flashy, solid special teams guy. Just a good guy to have on the roster. Played for Cleveland a couple years, then kind of lingered a couple more years, played 6 games between San Francisco and Buffalo in 2016, and then in 2017 actually made it onto the roster for the Cardinals for 1 week. It was actually like 4 days he got into a game, and then he was done. He has been reported, according to ESPN's Field Yates, is joining the Cardinals staff, which is interesting because I don't think there was any connection between him and anyone else on the staff other than GM Steve Keim. Someone told me on Twitter that while it was not announced what it was, I think Adam Kaplan says that it's going to be offensive quality control, which is the position he had in Cleveland, which means Cameron Turner is likely going to have a different position. Maybe he will take over as an assistant receivers coach. But Swinton, Dre, any comments about your reaction to those additions to the staff?
No, just because they're so minor at this juncture. I do like when guys are, going kind of running through the ranks and they start to have to deal with all this stuff. So we'll see kind of how it plays out. I don't think it's a good thing or a bad thing. I just think these are low level moves, and it's always interesting to see what they look like as they move forward.
I was really intrigued with the Swinton edition. He's a guy I didn't know much about, but then when I dove into his coaching history, he's Jeff Rogers' guy. Jeff Rogers, the special teams coordinator and assistant head coach for the Cardinals. Randall McRae was on staff. He joined in 2018. He was a holdover from Steve Wilkes' group. But basically, Rogers gets his guy because this is now the third time that Swinton has joined. Well, one time they were staff together. Swinton followed him to Chicago. Or rather, followed him to Denver, that is, and now follows him to Arizona. And I like seeing connections like that because you saw with particular with Bruce Arians that he had his guys. And it appears that now Rodgers is reuniting. That's probably the guy he wanted to have with him the whole time, but because of contractual obligations elsewhere, because Swinton actually had a special teams coordinator position for a year. And then last year was just an offensive assistant. But so now he gets to be with Rodgers on Rodgers' staff there in special teams. I like that. Jim Dre is the one that's interesting to me, and it is. I'm finding he's going to have a similar role with the Cardinals. So offensive quality control looks like it's going to be the role. I'm interested to see. That's an interesting thing because when he was hired by the Browns, it made sense. Freddie Kitchens, who coached tight ends first. He was the tight ends coach for the Cardinals when Dre was a tight end for the Cardinals. And so it made sense to do that, to bring him on as an offensive quality control guy. He got his feet wet on the coaching staff at Stanford where he went to college. I'm going to be interested to see if and when they make the announcements, what connections there are, or if it's just simply Dre made enough of impression on Steve Keim that he would suggest that maybe this wasn't necessarily a Cliff Kingsbury move. This was another guy that Keim suggested that Kingsbury approved of.
Well, and that's one of those things where, again, guys usually go back to where they've been when they need, what's the word I'm looking for, to try and get their kind of coaching career started.
Absolutely. And so that'll be fun to see. I'm interested to see what happens elsewhere on the defensive staff in particular. There's still a guy out there that I kind of made some connections. Wade Phillips still he doesn't have a coordinator job. I haven't heard his name come up in many places, but there are a few spots where he could do that. But if he doesn't get a DC job, it would be so fantastic if he becomes a defensive consultant / defensive line coach, which is what's his bread and butter before he was a coordinator. I would love to see him join the Vance Joseph staff. It would be so great. Coming next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk. Now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, where we're going to talk about the Cardinals offseason. We're going to look into the offensive side of the ball, what the Cardinals need to do to address specific positions without talking names or faces and things like that. What do they need to do on those positions? That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk the offensive side of the ball, the needs that we have. Position by position, let's go through kind of what does their focus need to be this offseason? Whether it's a minor, major, whether they need to make a splash or not, or spend big draft capital. We'll just kind of talk about position. Quarterback. Obviously, we know the starting position is set. What do you see as what the Cardinals need to do at quarterback this offseason?
What? His name just escaped me. My goodness. What? Who was our backup this year?
Brett Hundley.
I was wanting to say Murphy for some reason. Hundley, I think you re-sign him 3 years, $10 million. I think he's a great fit and mentor, and that's. I mean, what were they paying Drew Stanton? 10 or $5 million a year, 4 to 5.
It was getting close to that, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, if you can get Hundley for 3 and 10, that takes you through the entirety of Kyler's first rookie contract before they have to give him that 5th-year rookie extension, and then all of a sudden they're paying the big money.
Obviously, they do have to address backup, whether it's bringing back Hundley or deciding to go after Case Keenum, which is a name who's probably going to come up. You always want to, I don't know what their thought is on Drew Anderson. Obviously, he was a guy they really liked. You heard, and I heard through you, I think it was, that there was talk that the Cardinals initially, it was going to be cool. They were going to take a quarterback with the very first pick and the last pick of the draft. That Drew Anderson was on their radar for the very last pick of the draft, and then Caleb Wilson was still available. They sign him. He makes the practice squad. He actually gets poached by another team for a little bit. He comes back to the practice squad and gets promoted at the end of the year for Week 17, so he's still on the roster. So it's clear that they kind of want him around. I don't know what they see him long term. I know kind of the goal for him was to maybe put himself in a position to compete for the backup job for next year. But you always want to have competition. So we know the starter's Kyler. They're going to need to somebody needs to be the backup. And then you always need competition for the developmental quarterback at the back end, probably the practice squad. So I think whoever that is, they need to have someone else to compete with Drew Anderson, whether it's someone that beats him out or Drew Anderson shows that he's good enough or even maybe is good enough to be the backup. I don't know. I think he's probably too early to tell with that, especially with Kyler entering year 2. But backup and give someone to compete. You need some competition at the very back.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think if you a Drew Anderson and then potentially another kind of cheap undrafted free agent type,
or maybe a Canadian Football League quarterback like they brought in a couple of times, Chris Stiefler from Calgary or whatever, who can run the ball as well, so he's dual threat. Or now the other guy, I have no idea, but was it Tyler Strugman or something like that? I barely could find anything about him, and apparently he was in for a workout. That would be interesting. He's a local kid, played at Texas A&M forever ago, Washington State. So he's got some skin in the game in terms of the offensive scheme. Running back's an interesting position because it looks like they might have a surplus. Where do you need? I think obviously we can probably agree that they need to address their number one running back position, whether that is standing pat with David Johnson, moving that deal, and then acquiring or re-signing a number one. But what would you say is kind of what they have to do at the running back position?
I go back and forth on this. I think if you're able to move David Johnson, I think you sign Kenyon Drake. If you're not able to move David Johnson, I don't know if you can put the money – and I know sunk costs and all of that, but I just don't know if you can put the money to have $20 million in running backs on the roster. While the 49ers have that much money invested in their running backs and are starting a guy that makes like 600,000. They also are able to get away with having a lot of street free agents starting on their offensive line, and they have 4 former first round picks on their defensive line who don't command a lot of salary right now. So when you have all of that kind of into one, it's okay that you're paying Jerick McKinnon and Tevin Coleman and Kyle Juszczyk $22 million combined this year, and that Raheem Mostert and who's the other guy? I can't remember.
Breida.
Matt Breida are your kind of 2 bell cows, right? Like, it's not a big deal. But for the Cardinals, I don't think you can do that when David Johnson's at $13 million or something like that next year.
Something absurd, like $14 million is the cap hit next year.
And you have to pay Drake, $6 million. Like, you just can't. You can't put $20 million into a position and only be using one guy, because at least Tevin Coleman and Kyle Juszczyk are, 50+% players on that, and I don't know if that's a role David Johnson would have. And by the way, David Johnson's going to make as much as Tevin Coleman and Kyle Juszczyk combined next year.
So number one, I don't think there's any way around it. They've got to deal David Johnson somehow. With how things played out last season, I don't think there's no way he could be on the roster this year. The way Cliff Kingsbury basically said, like, his words and his actions were 2 completely different things. The fact that he didn't play at all in Week 17, and there were a couple of games he had no playing time, just tells me he's done with him. And once that's happened, there's no going back. There's no going back to David Johnson. And so they have to move him. Whether they bring back Kenyon Drake or not is a completely different thing. But the number one, they can't really go back to David Johnson. And if for some reason it's impossible to trade, they can't cut him. So they can't re-sign Drake if they keep David Johnson. But if you keep David Johnson, then you are screaming loud and clear. You will see them draft a running back that they believe can replace him.
And not only draft a running back, all of a sudden it becomes a priority.
Yes.
Because you cannot go in with Chase Edmonds, David Johnson, and then like a late day 3 running back. I think you're going to end up seeing them draft a running back in the top 100 if they don't trade David Johnson and re-sign Kenyon Drake. I think they could still draft a running back if they trade Johnson and sign Drake, but now you're talking about a flyer late in the draft type thing.
Yeah, a guy that's going to be that's like Chase Edmonds essentially.
Right. So, but now all of a sudden you're going to be talking about like J.K. Dobbins and Jonathan Taylor and these type of guys, and like, would they make it to 40 to be drafted? Because a lot of talent went back in the draft too, so that's going to be something to watch.
Yes. What do you think about receiver? I think everyone kind of believes that they need a number one, kind of that impact, because they're kind of stuck on the Christian Kirk's really nice, Larry Fitzgerald's really nice, and then you've got some young guys behind them. You've got Andy Isabella, who you want to be good, and Hakeem Butler, who's got some flashes but was on the IR, and you got Keyshawn Johnson. But none of that really works without your big dog.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about this off the air, so I think there's 2 ways they can go about this. I think one way is to sign a veteran receiver at a marginal cost, or spend a premium pick. If they sign a veteran,
but it can't be Michael Crabtree type.
No,
and it can't be Kevin White. So you can't do that crap again.
Right. So, I mean, if they go out and sign somebody, let's say like Emmanuel Sanders, a guy that could command, in the range of 25 million over 2 years, you might say, well, that's a lot, but I mean, that's right on par with what he's playing like. I think he had more yards and touchdowns than Fitz this year. So, and so you can then sell, hey, this is year 2 for Isabella. Really, it's year 1 for Hakeem Butler. So we're gonna take another year, develop them, see what comes of this. The other option is that you trade or that you draft a pick high in CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy, in the first round, and let them kind of come in and be your top dog. I think those are really the two options you have moving forward for this off-season type thing.
Well, and I think it makes sense because you've already got solid inside players where you've got Fitz and Kirk who fit inside. They have Isabella, who they believe will be an impact inside player. Butler, you hope maybe can become a star outside, but thus far you kind of want him to simply be a gadget type player who can do at least one thing really well and win down the field. And Keyshawn, maybe he develops this. So you've got a lot of specific role type things, but you don't have your big dog right now, and that's kind of what they need one way or another. Add someone in free agency, but they've got to address that position. And while as many they do think Christian Kirk maybe can be that guy, he hasn't shown it. And while there was talk, I mean, I think the coaches believed if had he been healthy, they thought maybe he could be like a 1,300 yard guy sort of player. The problem is his 1,300 yards are going to look different than your traditional big X that's going to be putting up big numbers on the outside.
Right, and that's where the problem came in. We talked about it a little bit last podcast, but that ESPN stat, where they were a top 10 team in terms of providing 2.5 seconds to pass for their quarterback. Part of the reason that they weren't even higher and that their sack numbers were so high was because they lacked the receiver to create continual separation. So I think that's a kind of a combination thing that you kind of want to watch moving forward and see how it plays out, because while it is a chicken or egg scenario, there was a reason that San Francisco, even though they drafted Deebo Samuel in the second and they drafted Dante Pettis in the second round, and they drafted what was the guy's name in like the fourth round the year before, that they traded for Emmanuel Sanders. And oh, by the way, remember they have an all-pro tight end in George Kittle, and it's because you do need that kind of singular receiver who can create separation consistently, because then what it does is it allows your other receivers that maybe aren't winning one-on-one consistently to get more opportunities to win in one-on-one situations and not have to worry about double coverages.
At tight end, with the re-signing of Max Williams, they have their all-around guy. Dan Arnold offers them some intrigue. I think they need to put another body at the position. I don't know if it has to be a free agent. I don't think – obviously, to me, tight end, that's not a position they need to throw money at. They just need to get another – like, you can't the way they counted on Ricky Seals-Jones, and then he didn't come up he wasn't as good as they needed him to be. That's kind of what I don't want them to see do with Dan Arnold. So Dan Arnold looks promising, but let's not count on him. So add another veteran, whether it's bringing back Charles Clay or someone of the like, or adding maybe a day 2 tight end potentially. But I think they need to add another little bit of talent. Because Darrell Daniels and he's a nice player, but I don't think he's going to ever be more than a third tight end special teams guy. And that's okay. You need guys like that on the team, but you need, especially with how the offense went, you want to have 2 tight ends you can count on consistently to be at least consistent willing blockers who can make a couple of plays down the field.
And, that's such a hard role to find a 2-way tight end. So like you said, if you have Max Williams and then you have Dan Arnold as kind of your big target, now you're looking for kind of an H-back type that can move and block consistently. And then all of a sudden it becomes a little easier because you just need to find a guy that, like you said, is going to come in and he can be part of 2 tight end sets, or he can move and block, and he's going to be a guy that isn't needed, but maybe 35-40% of the snaps, and he can be a guy that you find late in the draft or in undrafted free agency, or late in the year, or late in the kind of free agency year, where you just kind of wait to see how he winds up.
On the offensive line, they need to pay a left tackle. So they need to. It's either re-sign DJ or pay someone to be their left tackle, or either that, or then you run the risk of having to commit to drafting a guy who's going to be your starting left tackle early on, which it's not necessarily ideal. The interior of the line, they're actually in good shape. They don't need to do anything there. AQ Shipley, they can re-sign, but if they don't need to. Mason Cole can jump right in, and Lamont Gilliard should be able to fill in for what Mason Cole did. But the 2 tackle positions are really the two musts. They need to pay a left tackle, and then they need to address right tackle, hopefully without throwing a lot of money at it.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we talked about a little bit with the San Francisco 49ers offensive line. The 49ers drafted Joe Staley 6 head coaches ago, I believe it was, 7 head coaches ago. So, and then they drafted Mike McGlinchey to eventually take over for Joe Staley, apparently after he passes away in 2035 at the ripe old age of 70, because the dude just doesn't stop playing. I mean, and playing at a high level at that. So they drafted McGlinchey number 9 overall. Their other 3 starters are a failed first-round pick from the Detroit Lions that they traded a 7th-round pick for, a street free agent that they signed late in the year after their hugely paid center got injured, and then a guy that they cut in 2011 after he was a 7th-round pick, and then has played for 7 teams in between. And by the way, did you see that their running back set the NFL record for yards in a championship game? So that's the thing, is people mistake the idea that you have to invest highly at every position along the offensive line to get a great offensive line, when the reality is you need 1 or 2 studs, and then from there you need solid, maybe not spectacular types. Humphreys is obviously a guy that they need to figure out and address. They need to figure out if he is the guy that they want to pay moving forward. I think overall, you look at Humphreys, and there's zero reason why he's not your starting left tackle in 2020. The question becomes, is he your starting tackle in 2021? That's where I sit on the Humphreys questions, because I think that you can get a guy like Humphreys in the draft this year in round 2. I'm actually writing an article right now about all the guys at the Senior Bowl that could potentially replace DJ Humphreys in 2021. And if they don't replace Humphreys, they could replace Justin Murray, who you sign back on his, restricted free agent deal. You tender him and then kind of just move on from there. Like you said, I think overall the interior of the offensive line is settled. Can you get a better player than J.R. Sweezy? Absolutely. But again, how much can you invest in the offensive line overall? And that's the question you have to ask yourself. How much can you continue to throw at the offensive line? And at some point, it has to be about scheme and development more than anything else. I thought we saw this year that it was a really strong scheme and development type of year. And I think that's why the Cardinals are so obsessed with the idea of returning this starting 5, because they saw the growth of the guys overall. I mean, all you have to do is look at the difference in the first Rams game and the second Rams game a month apart to see kind of what they can be as a unit. It's just about time and that. But if you can't re-sign Humphreys for whatever reason and you don't feel like franchise tagging him, I think fans are going to be disappointed in either the cost benefit of replacing Humphreys, because you're not going to get an all-pro. Like, you might get an upgrade from Humphreys, but you're not going to get an all-pro. And if you're going to get an upgrade from Humphreys, it's going to be an Anthony Costanzo who is already threatening and talking about retirement. So, like, it's not like you're just going to pick a guy up at 8 and be like, all right, now you're our starting left tackle, and then he's going to be a top 12 left tackle in the NFL. Like, it's a huge growing pain. And more than that, coming into this offense, it will be, a hugely different for a guy, like Tristan Wirfs, who played right tackle at Iowa, where they like to do something like run the football, or a guy like Jedrick Willis, who was a right tackle at Alabama, or, whoever you want to name. So at 8, I think there's a lot to the entirety of it. And I think if they can keep it intact for at least one more season, you can do a great job of addressing it this offseason and be ready for 2021 if you need to move on.
Coming next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we're going to wrap things up and talk about the defensive side of the ball and what needs to happen in terms of the offseason focus. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And here's the last part, the defense. So we got the 3 levels. And honestly, if in my opinion, the defensive side of the ball is where they need to throw some money at. And maybe not make us. There's basically 2 positions in my opinion. We'll get more into who might be a good fit in future shows, but the defensive line is one they need to get. They need starting caliber players added because they just went through so many last year. You can't count on. So you've got one starting caliber player in Corey Peters and a second year player who could be in Zach Allen, but you need to get, in my opinion, they need to add two starters to that line so that Zach Allen doesn't have to be a starter, or that maybe Corey Peters could be pushed to a reserve role.
Wouldn't it be nice if Corey Peters could finally play 50% of the snaps like has been the expectation in the last 3 years? I mean, that's what people don't understand is like the expectation for Peters has been to be a 50% snap guy. I think he's only done it once. So when you look at it, I think this is the perfect offseason to need defensive line talent because there is a plethora of guys that fit the bill of being a 50 to 60% guy. There are guys coming out of Buffalo, Baltimore, and New England,
Houston,
Denver. Yeah. I mean, so you look at it, Buffalo was one of the best run defenses in the NFL. New England was the best defense in the NFL, and Baltimore, I think, ended up being like the fourth best defense in the NFL. And all three of them have young pieces that would command in the same range of what Darius Fallon got, about $5 million a year. I think, like you said, adding two of those guys, while I would love to add Chris Jones and write another draft wrong of the Cardinals history, I think getting a guy like Danny Shelton and Jordan Phillips out of Buffalo at a combined 11 or 12 million is better than paying Chris Jones, who is a better player than those two, 20 million by himself. Like, that's just how I look at it. I think Chris Jones is the better player. I think he's not worth double two players at the position because, as you said, the Cardinals probably need to add two players where they can then make some decisions on a guy like Zach Kerr, Rodney Gunter. They don't have to rush Zach Allen back because obviously the neck injury was a problem. They don't have to ask Corey Peters to be their Iron Man along the defensive line anymore, and you probably would get better production from Corey. So I think all of that would play into, a really nice situation.
Moving to the next area, on the edge, if we're going outside linebacker, obviously you've got Chandler Jones. The second position it's unsure. If they plan on because they can't really cut Hassan, but he could be thrown into a trade. At the same time, he showed a little bit of promise there playing outside linebacker, but that doesn't mean you necessarily want to count on him to be a starter. So, in my opinion, you need to add. You need 1 to 2 players of maybe starting caliber, but not true starters at the position. Basically, 1 to 2 rotational guys who can start potentially. And there's some guys as we talk forward will make some fits that won't necessarily cost a lot of money. But obviously, you'd like to count on Hassan Reddick, but we're not going to count on him.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit it on the head. Well, that's what you want to be able to do is have a guy like Hassan Reddick go into the season as your starter and have a veteran behind him, but not a veteran like a Terrell Suggs, more like a Kyler Fackrell type that, or what Tampa Bay was able to do with the Shaq Barrett. Obviously, you're not expecting 19.5 sacks from anybody, but where you can get somebody on a $3-4 million deal, and if you don't see the growth that you're looking for in Reddick, then you have somebody in place. Because I don't think this is the draft class, if you're not drafting number 2 overall with Chase Young, to need an edge rusher. Not saying that you won't find quality edge rushers. I'm just saying in general, I don't think it'll be easy, especially at 8. So at 40, you could find some guys that would fit. but I think you would like to see Reddick get the opportunity to be the guy.
At inside linebacker, obviously you've got Jordan Hicks. He played well. That second linebacker position, they need an impact starter.
And again, we talked about it with defensive line. Inside linebacker is another one this season where, man, it's a good year to need an inside linebacker. It just really is. You look at the names overall, and there's a bunch of names to know. But I think the biggest thing is you've got guys like Corey Littleton from the Rams. You've got guys like Joe Schobert from the Browns. And then you've got guys, a guy like Patrick Onwuasu from Baltimore. You've got a Blake Martinez out of Green Bay. You've got you could even bring back a guy like Josh Bynes, who probably would have been a better signing or keep than what they did this year. I think it's another good season to need it's a good season to need an inside linebacker, and then you can make a decision in the draft where you don't have to force it. I don't know. I know Cardinals fans are obsessed with Isaiah Simmons, but there was an interesting comment I read today, and it was talking about Simmons after he declared for the draft, and that there's going to be some GM that drafts him just to play him at inside linebacker and watches him kind of wither away, because he's a great football player. And the last thing you would want to do is draft a guy that's a great football player lining up all over the field and then just ask him to play inside linebacker. We saw it with Daniel Buchanan here. It's just not, in my opinion, conducive to ask a guy like Simmons to just be an inside linebacker, because he's got so much talent and stuff to offer a defense where he's really a box safety that can play linebacker in spots when needed.
He's almost too big to play safety at a time when safeties aren't that big anymore is the issue. He's built more like a late career Adrian Wilson.
He's going to end up being a lot like Cam Chancellor. That's what I think. When you look at him, he lined up at safety for 218 snaps, slot cornerback for 286 snaps, outside linebacker at 160 snaps. He only lined up inside 120 snaps. The only position he played less was true cornerback, and that was he did that 17 snaps. So that's the thing is, again, I wish I could find it, but yeah, it's hilarious that he's, people just want to lock him into being a inside linebacker when his best position is truly just to be a guy that creates havoc from all over the field. He's going to be a Cam Chancellor like type of player in the NFL.
At the defensive backfield, it's, for me, in my opinion, at cornerback, they only need to do so. This is going to come down to what they view about Robert Alford. If they view Robert Alford as being in a position to jump back in and be a starter, they don't need to do anything. They would be well suited to adding a veteran who has starting experience but doesn't have to start. Because with Patrick Peterson and with Byron Murphy and with Robert Alford, if you get another guy in there, and plus you've got Kevin Peterson, you could bring back Chris Jones, those guys. So You really don't need to do anything at corner. And the same can be said at safety. You would like to add a veteran, but you don't necessarily have to add a starter because Jalen Thompson looks like he's good enough to be a starter and to be good in year 2.
Yeah, and so that's the thing is I think getting one veteran safety would be good, and probably be the best thing, but overall it's not a pressing need type of thing. The one question I have, and this is going to make people upset, but whatever, is if you have a chance to draft a guy like Isaiah Simmons who can be kind of a box safety or be a bigger Baker, would you do it and not re-sign Buddha? Because that's the one thing that's kind of gotten the Cardinals in trouble is re-signing safeties. And so that's what the question becomes is do you prepare for a potential a potential of him leaving and just have a plan in place already? Because remember, he's going into his third year, or is he his fourth year? So he's
entering year 4.
So it's his final year. He's in a contract year.
Yes.
So so they're going to have to pay him. So that's the thing is that for me would be the only reason you maybe draft a guy early instead of just signing a veteran. And again, I'm not saying that's what they should do or shouldn't do. I have no opinion right now on that. But I think that's one of the things that would behoove Steve Keim is to have players in place so you're not up against it when things happen like somebody retires or somebody gets hurt or things of that nature.
And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We should be back next week, and we can talk about, kind of preview the Super Bowl. We can talk about the Senior Bowl, which is happening this week. And then we will start to more heavily go into free agency in the next shows after that. But until then, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is the Rise Up C-Red podcast. You can find us everywhere that you can find a podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon enough. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, C-Red, and of course, Rise Up, C-Red.